Declared. And let's pause. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another very exciting fundraising talk. We have a great guest speaker today. And today we're talking about, are you ready for 2021? Normally by this time of the year, and I say normally in inverted commas, we've done our strategy, we've done our budget, we're hyped, we're gearing down to the last push towards the end of the year. But as we know, 2020 threw us a huge curveball. So I think like many of us, a lot of us, including myself, was like, okay, so what is 2021 going to give us? Am I ready? How do I do my planning? Because we're all in this turmoil. So we felt it really important to get a guest speaker in that's going to just help us focus about really how we get ready for 2021 and how we as fundraisers make sure that we are adequately ready, that last push in this last quarter, so that we can start 2021 with a fresh view and with a clear strategy and know exactly what we're talking about. So before I move on, if we can ask everyone to please make sure that they mute their cameras and their voice or their microphones. And thank you for joining us. This is a really exciting forum. This is about us as a tribe. This is about us supporting each other. And for anybody that's new on the tribe, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And for our regulars, thank you for coming back and spending time with us as we share and support each other. Mel, over to you to do some of the housekeeping.
Thanks. Morning, everybody, and welcome. Just a little reminder that we are going to mute our microphones, not our cameras, and switch off our cameras. It does help us a little bit with bandwidth and also stops us hearing the hardy-dars, the babies, and the barking dogs. So that would be really lovely. Just a reminder that we do record each session and we do put it onto our YouTube channel. So the reason we always draw attention to this is we don't want anyone to share something that they perhaps oughtn't. So if you have a question that is a little bit controversial and you don't want to be identified, please private message us. We're very happy to share questions anonymously, but just don't put yourself in a position that might be awkward. I'm so excited about today's session. I'm really looking so forward. I had a little sneak preview and I think it's going to be absolutely brilliant. Kelvin, I don't think I've left anything out, have I? So shall we?
No, if you haven't, I'm going to stop sharing and then let's...
Okay, so while you do all of the admin, I'm going to talk because I love to talk. I am so excited to have Carolyn with us today. I'm in awe of the fact that she speaks fluent English, German, and Spanish. I barely manage my Afrikaans, and unfortunately, between isiZulu and isiXhosa, I've never caught on. I'm sorry, guys. So I'm always in awe when people are multilingual. But I've known Carolyn for a number of years now, and she is an amazing seasoned strategist working in both government and the nonprofit sector. And in 2018, she actually launched her own transformation and development agency called The Workroom. So please pop onto her website and say hi if you need help from somebody like her, because it's amazing. She has a master's degree in development studies and is deeply committed and passionate about social justice and transformation. She is German by birth, but has family in Indonesia and has lived for the past 14 years in South Africa. So she understands our madness very well. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you, Melanie, for the introduction. Yeah, so it's fantastic to be here. So thanks, Kelvin, Melanie, for the opportunity. I've been following your group. It has been fantastic. I think it's been such a great initiative. And as you said earlier, helped us even through some of the difficult times to stay connected. And it's fantastic that you're still doing this. So I will try my best to add a bit to your mix today. And hopefully we can have a chat later all together and see. So I am not a fortune teller, so I will not be able to predict what's going to happen in 2021. But I've tried to put together a few points that I think are really important to think about when we think about the next year and things to come, and also think about that we are still in a pandemic that's, as we just heard, Europe is locking down again, and obviously we're all hoping that we'll be spared at least the next lockdown. So let's get started. So are you ready for 2021? I'll be talking not just purely about fundraising, I'll be talking about organization in general, and then focus a bit on the fundraising aspect of it. Because in all my work that I do, I always connect strategy and fundraising. I think those two are like twins. You can't have the one without the other. So your strategy for 2021. As Calvin said, you probably have done your strategy, or you may be just about to finish it. And so here are a few things that I think are important. So let's get started. The one thing that I think we often, when you do strategy, you think, I've done this a number of times, and, let's just continue what we've been doing. I have this year had some exciting opportunities to actually work with organizations who took this very seriously to design a new strategy, and did something called either horizon scan, scenario plan, bit of a contextual analysis, because the world is a different place, and to actually dive into a bit of the global context, and not just COVID, also a lot of other things that have shifted, maybe due to COVID, but also because of other things, to understand a bit the continental drivers, what's happening on the continent, maybe in the region and in South Africa, has been very helpful to shift some thinking and really say, how do we respond as an organization to it? And that might be very helpful for obviously your funding in future, because that means you actually tuned in what's happening and the things that are happening around you. As part of your strategy and your fundraising strategy, I would pose the question, have you done research into the international funding landscape? And I'm asking that question because even if you receive mainly local funding, or your organization is fairly small and you're really focused on South Africa only, how international development cooperation is going to work in the future will have a huge impact on South Africa and Southern Africa. So for example, that there's a move to the far right in Europe. There is climate change happening. All these things impact how countries decide and allocate their development budgets every year. And so to understand those shifts, to do some research, to look into the big names of DFID and CEDA, Sweden, and others, might be a good idea to give you an idea what's going to happen internationally with funding, because sometimes, often, foundations and so on take a lead, or at least also look into those bigger funders and how they could, how they would influence their funding in future. Corporates in South Africa will have less money. It doesn't mean that corporates will cut all their CSI or cut money to social impact work. Many of them have given a lot during COVID, and they will continue to do so, but it might shift. It might get less. They might not take on new organizations. They might stick rather with the ones they know. So my advice would be, if you get corporate funding, speak to your regular funders and donors, also to your other donors, not just the corporates, but also start inquiring with them. How are you doing? How's your business going? What do you think is going to happen to CSI? Because that can prepare you for next year and how you might have to plan for money. Then COVID-19, I mean, I'm sure you've done all your webinars and so on the challenging times and the adjustment you have to make as an organization. But the one question I still ask organizations, what are the niches and opportunities that emerged from COVID-19 in your particular area of work? Have you really into that? Have you captured the moment and said, okay, there are also opportunities to innovate, and there are opportunities to do something differently? So so if you haven't done so, I would still say go for it. Really have a look. What are the things that your organization can do differently, or niches that your organization could cover that COVID-19 has opened up in a sense. Then we've all worked in this uncertain time, in this rapid change. Especially at the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We didn't know what's going to happen the next few months. And I think now we've probably settled a bit in. We've learned to cope a bit with the uncertainty. But what will be important for you is to see your strategic plan as a draft. So I'm combining that with my next point. So you're probably all doing multi-year strat plans. So probably something between 3 to 5 years, which is great. And I think it's very important for an organization to have that vision, to see, how you're doing. But incorporate elements of testing, reviewing, learning, adaptation. So it means don't take your plan and think you can just implement it for the next 5 years. Have in between sessions where you really relook what's happening around me, and depending also how the pandemic evolves, how the funding landscape evolves, you would have to do that after 6 months, after 12 months. So plan for elements of that. Don't plan that things will run in a linear way for the next 4 to 5 years, or that you just be able to implement how you've been doing. So that's a very important element to have. It's basically agile type of working, and I'll speak to that a bit more. And then there are the big topics that we had this year, besides COVID-19, GBV, climate change, racism. I mean, they're not new topics, of course. We had them for a long time, but they have surfaced again, and not just in South Africa, but globally. So how is your strategy responding to it? You might not work on climate change, you might not have a direct impact, but what is your thinking? Are you doing anything that contributes, that shows your funders you have put your thought into climate change? So those are also important points that I always make, even though it's not your focus areas. Have some elements of that. At least think as a team, what could you do to respond to that? And the last point around your strategy, of course, stakeholder centered. Again, it's probably not something new, but your donors, your funders do want to hear more and more. How are your beneficiaries doing? How are your stakeholders doing? So they don't want to just hear you talking. They really like to hear the voices of your stakeholders. They like to hear the impact that it makes. And I know there were a few sessions, so go to the YouTube channel and see the storytelling, the impact, and things that are really important to consider when you write your strategy. Okay, so that's around your overall strategy and a bit your fundraising strategy. And I thought the last bit of my presentation, I'm going to focus a bit then, how do you actually operate in 2021? In this time, in this uncertainty. And the one thing that is becoming also is a buzzword, but it's really happening also in international development work. It's the whole concept of agile management, agile working. And it's often described as using a compass rather than a map. So it means more flexibility, less fixed linear planning and thinking, but rather having waves of learning, adaptation. So what does it mean in practice, actually? So I don't want to just throw out buzzwords of, agile management, but what could it mean for an NGO working in this context? So the first thing is to explore new operational models. So that means, are there any maybe online tools or tools that you can use to do your project management? I'm assuming that all of you obviously had to move online with your financial systems, your operations, your admin. But are there any maybe systems, platforms that can help you with that you can use, that could make your life easier? There are chat platforms. I've recently worked with organizations that stopped using email internally. They just use a chat program, so something like Teams, Slack, Jammer, I mean, you name it. But they don't use any emails internally. They just use their program, and emails are only for kind of external partners and clients and stakeholders. So think about that, because that could help to make a few things easier, faster. Then what else does Agile mean? Agile means empowering your teams to be able to react to multiple futures. So it's exactly that what we've been finding ourselves in the last few months. And maybe some of you had the same experience, that within your organizations, there's a few people that have been kind of, pulling the weight, that have been, kind of adapted quickly, that had obviously innovative ideas. And it's not for everyone, but because we were moving in this new time, it might be a good idea to help your teams to get there. What skills do your teams need to be more agile, to adapt quicker, to not be used to working in a certain way that they have to? So so that's another part of how agile management could manifest itself in your organization. Then I've mentioned that shorter cycles of review, so monitoring and learning, testing, and also challenge your donors on that. Involve them and say, look, we can't just do things and have a log frame type of or results framework, and that works from A to B to C. There will be forth and back, and I think more and more donors also get onto that. Data is key. So besides your monitoring and evaluation, there is a huge amount of data that you can collect for yourselves. How you're doing as an organization, how's your funding doing, how much time do you spend on certain tasks. So those are all elements of data, and the world is really moving into wanting to see data, analyzing data, and it will help you also to be on top of your game. And then think and analyze global, decide local. So that goes back to my point on strategy. So, have a global picture of the world, what's happening around you. But of course, your context is important, and you need to decide what's happening and make the decision for your organization in the South African context. So just a little quote. I really like that one. There are those who can work with ambiguity and those who are frozen by it. Some people need the route map, and others want to throw away the map and say, let's go and see where the sea takes us. So that obviously speaks to agility, but it also speaks that we're all different. And so, it means we need to take our teams along to manage and to sail this kind of new way of working. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Another thing that seems counterintuitive in a time where money seems to get less, but in terms of how you do things, I would suggest invest in fundraising. If you can influence it in any way in your organization, think about, kind of really putting your money into that. Maybe hire a new person. Are there any innovations you want to try as a new type of fundraising that you could do, but that would require some funding? Is there anyone in the team that needs to be upskilled, or do we need to get a new top candidate to join the fundraising resource mobilization team? Are there systems and processes that will boost your fundraising efforts? So is there anything that will make your fundraising easier, less manual, so that you have to spend maybe less time on the more manual things, and can really focus on writing the fantastic proposals, putting together the slide decks, so that that you can have kind of basically those winning proposals that will get you new funding. And prospecting. So because the world is moving fast, you need to spend time of finding new funders, new ways of support. So it's not necessarily just funders or foundations, but it might also be new ways of funding. There might be awards, innovation prizes. There might be things that you want to consider. So, and that means, again, you need to invest, someone needs to invest time into this task. So I think that, kind of consider this point, and investing in fundraising will help you to get through 2021, should we see another difficult year ahead of us. And this point, even though it's not really linked to fundraising, but I like to make the point because it's often something that we don't like to talk about so much. And I think it's equally important to have self-care and to look out for your teams, to talk about mental health and well-being, because only if your teams are well, you can do well. There's lots of pressure, and again, also especially fundraising and resource mobilization teams will probably feel the pressure even more. So don't forget about this. It's really important to have that. And the operating principles is probably not new for many of you, but donors and funders internationally are looking more and more for these. So if you want to be ready for 2021, see that, if you can incorporate those into the way you do work, or accountability, make it a buzzword. I think in South Africa, we often are very polite when it comes to working together. And we need to learn to agree to disagree, but we also need to learn to really hold each other accountable without taking it personally. But to really learn be holding each other accountable for the good of the organization, for the things that we want to achieve. Make it a buzzword, practice it on small things, practice to do it all the time, because if people are able to say things immediately, there's no buildup of anger, there's no buildup of issues, and that will hold you in good standing. If you come to difficult times in 2021, if you have to engage new funders and donors, it's really important that you can show you have a team that holds each other accountable and that does fantastic work. That's all about excellence and doing the best you can be. Purpose-driven. So I think in all the madness of also what we went through this year, sometimes we forget to remind ourselves it's not about the survival of our NGOs. It is actually about the survival of the impact we're making out there. And so it's really still asking ourselves, what would we have to do to not have to exist anymore? And I know it's a difficult question to ask, but it's to remind ourselves as NGOs, we're not ourselves there for the purpose. We are here, or we exist because there's a big need out there. And why we came into existence is to address the need. So let's kind of always keep that at the back of our minds, and that helps you also to really be on top of your game and to show funders we're not here to make our organization survive, but we're here because we're making a difference and we believe that we're making a difference out there. Transparency, I mean, you all know what's happening in the world out on data, in the internet, social media. The more transparent you are, the more of your policies and documents that you can put up, do so. Also within the organization, if you have the point I made earlier, new systems, kind of online project management platforms and so on, that creates a level of transparency because everyone can see what's happening and who's working on what. So try and think of that when you think about transparency. Data and information protection, then, of course, on the other hand, so it's not an either or, I think. Data and information protection, very important. Mel made the point, just, we have a Zoom call, we record it, be aware of it. So those are simple things, but you need to constantly aware of that, and also data information protection of our beneficiaries. And there are more and more donors that ask for that as well. What are you doing to make sure that the privacy and the data protection rights of your beneficiaries are taken care of? And yeah, staff well-being, I've made the point earlier. Yeah, and that's all I wanted to share for today. And now we can open the floor. I'll stop sharing, and you can ask me questions, or maybe there are questions already. So let's see.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. I think we are, to carry on with our compass analogy, we really are going into uncharted waters. And the more information that we have and the better prepared we are, the fewer curveballs we're going to face. So, Carolyn, I've actually got a couple of questions for you. The first one is, I've been facilitating quite a lot of strategies at the moment. It's that time of year. And I also think that time of pandemic, but anyway, let's not go there. And one of the things I found so interesting is that there are so many opportunities that have been identified by COVID that we never would have. I mean, I've had the privilege of going to the International Fundraising Congress in the Netherlands in the past. We didn't have to leave our bedrooms to do it this year. Well, I hope you left your bedroom because PJs and meetings don't go together. But the point I'm making is that we just have so many more opportunities that COVID has created, as well as challenges. So can you tell me about some of the opportunities that you've been seeing? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, thanks, Mel. So I think right at the beginning, and I think even you here on the, if I remember correctly, on your Zoom calls, meetings, there were a number of people that, started off. So it started with operations, I think, people were doing certain works, feeding schemes, and, and then was just starting to see opportunities to change operations. So to either upscale, to do things differently, so that was really on the level of operations. What I've seen then subsequently, and obviously as the months continue and people got more comfortable also moving things online, is people operating, for example, building new partnerships across countries and even continents. So it enabled, even the opportunity was there before, but somehow people got more on the bandwagon to think about, oh, who in India is doing something similar and who in Brazil is doing something. So it's not always the donor in the north and, the people give necessarily the money, but people started to engage partners across the world, which I think was really exciting. So somehow it opened up the opportunities. And then also on some of these amazing webinars, the IFC you mentioned. So all of a sudden it enabled, the whole world to basically share the best that's out there. So I think it's really created an opportunity for immense knowledge sharing and best practice sharing. So it's not just academic knowledge, it's literally people in the field getting their hands dirty in Rio de Janeiro or in Kailicha. So it's kind of, people that work on the ground could share or started sharing. So I thought that was really, really exciting. And out of that, new partnerships. So because funders, especially big ones, are moving into partnerships, so people were starting to build partnerships, and sometimes across geographies, but sometimes also thinking about sectors. So kind of, you're not the one does maybe the technical stuff, and recently worked with a client that does more kind of mobile apps and kind of mobile for social change. But they themselves are not an NGO. So they then find partners, big partners in the NGO world, and they start working together. So that's really, exciting, opening up opportunities across borders.
Mel, if I can ask a follow-on question of that, I think it's also, well, it's a question and a statement. Carolyn, how do you feel about nonprofits moving into more of a collaborative space and joint ventures when approaching donors? Because what I've seen out of COVID is that donors are starting to say, we're working in a particular community or geographical area, and we want to partner with a number of stakeholders so that we have a holistic impact as opposed to the traditional spray and pray model. And I mean, traditionally in South Africa, we were always like new, but I think it's starting to change. Your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's a way to go, to join partnerships. I think what in the past the experience was people were always open to have kind of these ideas. People always say, "Yay, let's partner, let's do these things." But the practicalities often were that one partner kind of carried all the weight, the others didn't come really to the party, and so on. So of course these things still exist. I mean. But I think people are now more flexible to share, and also it means start to share a bit of the operational burden. So, if you really enter into a big project of 2-3 years, big funding, and of course you need accounting and financial management, but then do you need 2 people, 2 organizations to, do that, or can one person, do that and take that over? And that speaks to, of course, becoming more efficient also as NGOs. So that's something that I haven't seen so much, particularly in South Africa, but I think it's also encouraging maybe NGOs to think about how can you almost have shared operations. Some of the things that you can share that will save you money, and especially if money is tight, it might be an opportunity to say, okay, let's have one finance management office, let's have one HR person that we share. So I would definitely say that's where things are moving to.
Thank you.
Great minds think alike. I also had a question around partnerships. And as we've been talking, I've always found that the majority, and I'm pleased I am generalizing, of nonprofits are very nervous, very actually quite uncomfortable with the concept of partnerships. I think for all the reasons that you've mentioned. But that is changing. I mean, we are clearly seeing that. But what is your view on the structure of partnerships? Should NPOs engage with a lawyer to draw up an MOU? Money is always a thing with us, but what's your view on that? How do we set up the antenuptial agreement?
Yeah, so I don't think there's always kind of the one way to go. So I haven't really gone the route or heard the lawyer route, but let me say there are, sometimes there are multi-million contracts that, NGOs implement together. And I definitely think you need watertight contracts there to hold each other accountable. So I'm going back to my accountability point I made. So the one thing, if with a lawyer or without, you need to draw up a contract, and a contract that's not that's not just high level and say we're going to work together and implement together, but to be fairly detailed and say, look, this is, especially it goes to money, to really clearly state who gets which part of the money and for what, and what are the rules of the game, who gets the money in the account, when are we paying out. So I think, that's a really important point around money. But it's not just about the money, it's also about the teams. So when you start a partnership, it's also get from both organizations or all the organizations, the one person that will lead the project and get them to build a team, because they basically become a project team. So it's very important that also not a person is kind of, sent by an organization, attend this meeting and become the, kind of our go-to person. You need to really start seeing these projects as project teams. For that time period, you all put on the head of that project and you work together. Doesn't matter which organization you're from. And I think that's a culture we need to build more. And going back to the point of platforms, so there's enough platforms that, Asana, Monday.com, name it, that you can use to manage a project together. Simple thing, type in the names, who's doing what, everyone can log in, see, oh, this is my due date. So use these tools. There's also many free tools available to manage your projects.
Carolyn, I've got another question, is that, you spoke a bit about changing the way we do things in the sense of looking at the compass model as opposed to the traditional strategy. What advice do you have for the people on this Zoom call who are predominantly in management, in senior leadership? How do they start the conversation with boards about this change that we're all engaging? Because board members themselves are dealing with their own stuff. Board members themselves have got their own pressures. But the biggest challenge is obviously if you're going to change how you're doing things, and especially around strategy and thinking differently, one needs buy-in from board. What advice do you have of how we start that conversation with the board to get them to buy into this new way of thinking and this new way of modus operandi, because we've had to all adapt?
Yeah. I think actually use the COVID-19 opportunity because, it is and was a difficult year. Even if your organization has been doing well, the world has changed. So I think that's the opportunity to use and say to your board, look, the world has become a different place. So we have to catch up. And and to make clear proposals. So sometimes you see that the boards are busy, or some of the boards that might be traditional, that, you know, kind of a bit stuck in, we have been doing this the way we've been doing. So if you go to your board, do it with fairly concrete proposals. So be it a new system, be it to invest in fundraising, to have data and numbers there. Why would it make sense for the board to do that, that you're proposing? You know, why should they support you? And don't do everything at once. So, so don't overload your board. So if you say, look, we want to operate a little bit differently and have 2-3 suggestions, start there. And also your organization, depending on the size, because you need to take your team along. So if you start with 2-3 things, I think that you know, you will have better chances to get a buy-in this year than probably any other year.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is also true. I think that what I've seen is a lot of confusion with boards where they actually are not experts in the development sector necessarily, and they have less idea than we do. I mean, I sometimes think, you know, if we're floundering around in the dark, have a look at the boards. But I see that we have got a question from the floor that I'm actually going to ask, and I'm afraid, I hope my pronunciation is right. Kela Floko. But you've got your hand up. Would you like to share something or ask a question?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Kela Hloko. So I just wanted to ask, how do we, or is it a good idea to encourage everybody in the organization to participate in the fundraising and looking for funds? Because most NGOs, that job is mainly for management. You know, the I don't want to say the lower staff members, but how do we make it a bottom-up kind of approach where everybody is always in the lookout for funding, everybody is always in the lookout for you know, fundraising ideas? How do we encourage a culture of always looking for opportunities for all you know, the employees in the NGO or NPO space?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's really important to, I mean, it's a general question on fundraising, that I think organizations need to internalize that fundraising is not just one thing in this one department somewhere, but it's kind of, you know, basically what will sustain your organization. So I make that point when I help organizations to set up fundraising operations and so on, is fundraising as a general point should become part of the DNA of the organization. So it's not those people that beg for money, it's actually the people that help us to make a difference in the world. So we all going to help them. So that's kind of the culture that I would instill generally. So that's about proposal writing. Do you need, you know, you might need content from people who work in the field. So it's not, oh, those fundraising people again, but it's, oh, great, can I tell you my story so you can write a great proposal? So it's kind of a culture shift that needs to happen. And then in terms of looking out for opportunities, I think once you have that shift in an organization, people will, you know, look out for things. However, the one caution I would put is kind of let everyone be part of finding opportunities, but then send them to the fundraising team, because they are the ones that, you know how to check, is the organization really eligible for the call? Can they really, you know, apply? What's the process? Are we the right size of organization? So there are a little bit of technicalities that then the probably fundraising people have to look over, but certainly get the whole organization excited, because if you get people to find opportunities, I mean, how exciting if I'm a project officer, I sent an opportunity, we apply, we get the funding, I can implement the project. I mean, you know, how much more would it motivate me to do my job? So as the first thing is a bit of a culture shift. You know, fundraising is part of our DNA. The second is let everyone look out, but then give the technical work around fundraising to the fundraising people that do that.
Yes, I agree. And I've got 2 points to add to that, if I may. The first one is that your program teams are often closer to potential partnerships than you will ever be. And if you can inculcate that culture, as Carolyn says, of sharing, of wanting to be collaborative within your implementation as well as your fundraising teams, I think there's immense value in that. And, you know, I know that we do talk, and I think we've spoken several times, Kelvin, over our sessions this year, around the great chasm that sometimes exists, most times exists, between programs and fundraising. And I really think that now is the time. COVID has thrown us so many curveballs and has caused so much absolute chaos in our lives. Let's take something positive from it and use this opportunity to open these relationships. And then the other suggestion I have, kind of just a more practical thought that I have, I always ask the organizations that I work with when we do strategies, and anytime when I've got the whole team at my mercy and they can't get out because I've locked the door, is take a photo if you see the logo of a company that you've never seen before. I'm based in Cape Town, and a couple of times a year, in the good old days before COVID, I used to travel to Johannesburg for clients. I would snap photographs with my phone of logos I'd never seen before. A big truck would go past and be like, ooh, I've never seen that company, you know, and turn it almost into a game to encourage people who are out on the road doing your stuff, particularly if you're community-based, because you would want to know who's active in your communities. So there might be a way for you to engage in that fashion.
Mel, just sorry to add on to that point, what we've seen work really, really well is the program team and the bigger NGOs, the M&E and our team, because they're at the coalface, they often find out who is funding your competitors in the sector. So they're the greatest eyes and ears to see what's happening in the sector, what other organizations are doing differently that's working, what other organizations are doing to raise money, where they're raising that money from. And that's why it's critical, ladies and gentlemen, when you're doing your strategy specifically for fundraising, that you bring the program team into the discussion, because they, you know, you can raise all the money in the world, but if they can't implement, you're going to fail. Vice versa, they can implement great programs, but if you don't have money, you can't implement. So I think it's about sorting out that chasm, but also let them see the value they can add to your team and vice versa.
Absolutely. We've got another question from the chat, Carolyn. I think this is a really good one. We're going to stretch your brains a bit here. So Tamang points out that on the slide, how to operate and exploring new ways of operating, would you say that that only applies to the fundraising and marketing department, or should it affect the whole organogram?
The whole organogram. No, I mean, of course, there are some, I mean, I made some points that are very specific to fundraising, kind of the invest in fundraising and so on. But overall, the how to operate, being more agile, but also, for example, the point on staff well-being, and, you know, it's going to continue to make that point. Those are things that need to happen across the organization. You know, and agile, yes, it's, I mean, doing those, you know, more innovative things and being more flexible. You might want to start, of course, with some pockets in the organization, with a certain department, with one project. So again, it's always kind of also how quick can your organization latch on, how big is your organization. But generally, this is, I think, the way of the future, how organizations will operate. And so to get the whole organization slowly on that bandwagon is definitely the way to go. So my answer would be, let's you know, try and get the whole organogram, even if it's a phased plan, to work in a different way.
And on that subject, I've got a little note here to not let myself forget. We talk a lot about the need to be agile, and I used to joke with my team that fundraisers are so agile we should be gymnasts regardless of our size. But you don't always see that agility and flexibility across the organization. In fact, you seldom see it. What would you recommend to sort of limber up those joints and see who you can get on board in terms of looking at the world slightly differently.
Yeah. So I think you made the good opening there. It's kind of who can you get on board. So it's maybe look out for either the people that, kind of embrace the innovation, maybe look out for the young people in your organization that already kind of, just sitting there saying, oh, why can't they do things differently? Get one or two of the young people on board that, do the work differently, or use a new project, a new funder to try it out, because sometimes some of the funders are looking for innovation, or they love the idea if that you're going to do something differently, and they might support you right through. They might say, look, you haven't tried it, we haven't tried it, let's try it together. So those are, I think, opportunities. And of course, if you have a funder on board, then it's often also easier to get the rest of the organization, kind of the money comes and say, okay, now we kind of have to. So it's a bit strategizing probably as a fundraising team to who to get on board or how to best do it. But yeah, so it's kind of finding your complice within the organization that might drive the change and innovation, and people that are always interested to not just go the extra mile, but think outside the box, go beyond, and even look out for the people that sometimes you think, oh, they're so overboard, or they're so, you might find them even irritating, but listen to people that are different to you, because they might have to offer something that that you haven't thought of. So it's not just getting your teammates on board, but sometimes getting actually those people within the organization that you struggle to work with, but they might actually be the innovators. They might actually have that idea sitting somewhere, that you should look out for.
And just to follow on to that, we actually did a session last week on stakeholder mapping and stakeholder analysis. And I really think, I can't remember if we raised this specifically, but I really think that that is something that really needs to form part of the fundraising elements of stakeholder analysis, that we look for people within the organization almost to be ambassadors for the processes that we know need to happen. Because very often we are not the ones with the power to implement or sort of drive that change. But if we work strategically with those people, as you say, those different voices, I think there's great potential there to actually create a completely different, much better organization. And as Merle has said, the reality for many organizations is that if they are not agile, they may not survive. And this raises a point for me that Kelvin and I have been debating at length in recent weeks. We talk about agility and you don't want to be donor-led, but you do want to take advantage of the opportunities that present themselves. What do you do in a situation, and I've seen it with several organizations that I've worked with in the past. So COVID, we all started feeding hungry people because that was the immediate need, that was the thing in front of us. How do we refocus on our mission, on our why? Because I'm seeing so much mission drift into things like feeding. And my worry is hunger doesn't go away. So how are we going to sustain that? Do we have any intention of sustaining it? What happens if we don't?
Oh, that's a difficult one.
Challenging on a Thursday morning.
No, I'm joking. So, yeah, I think the challenge there is to start thinking about the big picture again. And I think that goes back to the point I made about your context analysis, your horizon scanners. Yes, you might, continue feeding people. You might have put in place a new way of operating, of getting a new project, and then the hunger will not go away in South Africa for a long time. So it might have to continue, but I think it's a good opportunity to start those alliances and think the big picture, because ultimately, and I know it might sound crazy, but what do we have to do to eradicate hunger? And I think we're so far off that we always think we won't achieve that anyway. But if you don't let your mind wander there or think about that, you will not eradicate hunger. So, and there are international and regional alliances that do think about it, and they don't just come together and talk. They actually bring together people from different industries and have learning labs and so on to really think about how to eradicate hunger. And I think as an organization, if you started either doing feeding schemes or you've expanded your operations, and you might already be part of it, but that's, I think, the point to latch on to go and think about the big picture, think about the system. So, and that's, I think, the biggest challenge we face in development. The needs is there in many areas. So we have to continue feeding hungry people, feeding, getting kids to school and all of these things that are kind of, that have to happen for survival. But at the same time, don't forget that there is a system that also needs changing. And even if you as a small organization can't be the push to change that big system, but you can be part of the discussion. You can bring in your ideas. You have the case studies, you have the connection to the people on the ground. So be part of those the changes and really those alliances that push the system and try to think about system change. So
Malcolm, I'll just challenge that, because it's Carolyn, it's what we're seeing. An example I saw literally last week was an organization that was really focused on food garden projects and community feeding projects and empowerment and whatever, and it's been around for 20 years. And under the auspices of being agile, they shifted a lot of their focus during COVID-19 to handing out food parcels, because the excuse was the community can't tender the community gardens because of COVID and social distancing and whatever. And it came about where one of their bigger donors said, we love what you're doing, but you're working in this community and we want to give out food parcels, so please can you facilitate it and we will give you funding for it. And obviously, the Christmas decoration was sparkly and the organization ran off and did it. My question is, where does one draw the line between agility and integrity around your values, your purpose statement, and why you're here? Because for 20 years, the same organization has been preaching the word of food gardens and community gardens is the way to go to address nutrition and hunger. Now, because of COVID, we've dumped all that. The food gardens literally died because no one's tended to it for 6 months. And we're throwing food parcels out every single week to thousands of people. And that's an interesting debate, because they've actually changed their entire organization as far as who they are, what they're doing, to respond to a donor saying, we've got funding, we'd like you to implement this program for us. So that's one case study, and I'm sure there's many more. But how would you, if you were asked to come in and advise the board of that organization, what would be your response?
Okay, I think the time is over. Saying so more seriously, so actually, Calvin, to be honest, I don't think it's agility. I think it's jumping on the bandwagon of a funder who gives you money, and it's not a judgmental statement. It's kind of, sometimes you do that for survival, sometimes you do that to kind of maybe bridge a bit of time. But I would really be cautious about that, because agility doesn't mean you do something differently. Agility really means doing how you do things. So it's kind of focus on your mission, focus on what you're doing, but be more flexible. So, don't necessarily, I'm not an expert in food gardens, but if I think about a program, don't buy the seeds for 12 months and but think about the 12 months, have a plan for 12 months, but after 6 months, look what's happening. And maybe it's not about, because what you described was obviously going from the one to the other extreme almost, kind of. So I would rather think, to look out, okay, food gardens, okay, might not work. There might be other challenges, but what are other people doing? What are people, and that's again where I open up the global, the continental best practices. Okay, is there a food garden in a different way, in a new way that can work? You know, as a different ways of planting plants. What is about urban gardening and so on and so on. So it might be new ways of doing food gardens. So that for me would be agility, and I would advise organizations to think about those things. So just generally, I would advise organizations, it's really the how you do things. It's not necessarily doing something completely different.
So thank you for that clarity, because that's exactly the point, is that they're now calling themselves agile and innovative, but you know, my moral compass is saying you've completely moved away from where you were. So, and it's not one case, there's many that, and it's not only food gardens, we're going to see the same thing around education, the aged, job creation, skills development. We're seeing it, our sector is just changing so quickly. So thank you for that clarity. Mel, I think we've got time for one more question.
Okay, I'm going to quickly make one statement, because I think Merle has encapsulated this beautifully. Agility is not necessarily what you do or offer, but more about how you provide your service. And I think that's so important. Thanks, Merle. So Marie has a question that is quite complex, and I know we are running out of time, but I really wanted to see if we can address at least a little bit of it. Building true and equal partnerships takes a lot of time and energy and often requires compromise. How do you strike a balance between investing in and negotiating a partnership while still keeping your own mission-focused purpose and work going, not sacrificing who, what, and why you exist?
Okay, let me try.
Tough one.
It is a difficult one. And of course, that's exactly the reason why many organizations then decide to not have partnerships. But I would also challenge organizations. There's the whole point you're making about compromise and giving up your, your identity. So I don't think a partnership should be about giving up your identity. It's like a marriage, right? So ideally, or a partnership, you shouldn't give up your identity when you get married to someone. You should keep your identity, but there are things that you're going to do together. And I do think that sometimes NGOs here in South Africa are a bit too much adverse to compromise, because it's the model that you hang on to. It's your way of doing things, and maybe the idea is, if you find a common project or that you want to partner on, is for both organizations to let it flow freely. So don't think of your model and how you've been doing things, and the other organizations try and bring it together, but rather address a problem. What's the project? What do we want to do? And then bring in those ideas and those experiences from both organizations. So don't bring in necessarily your models and the how you've been doing things, but bring in your knowledge, your experience, and then create a new project. I know it's difficult, and it's often also not easy to find the right partner, but maybe it's also about giving some time to find the right person, the right partner, before you enter into partnership. So maybe look out longer for the right partner, the people you feel comfortable working with, before entering into partnership. But yes, partnership, I agree, takes some time, and it's finding the time, like what do we want to invest in partnerships and what do we want to do on our own.
Melanie, I'm going to be the stickler of time. We need to end off, so.
Go for it. I leave it in your capable hands.
So Carolyn, firstly, thank you so much for a fantastic discussion and presentation and great thinking. And I do hope that everyone is appreciating, as much as I have, changing our thinking and doing things differently. And we look forward to seeing lots of innovation and creativity. And we hope that this has empowered you to do your planning for 2021 and look at 2021 very differently. So exciting news, ladies and gentlemen. 1st of December in the world is Giving Tuesday, which is traditionally the first Tuesday after Thanksgiving. It's an American thing that started many years ago, and they also have a South African arm. And it's all about getting society to give back on a particular day. So next week, we are very, very fortunate to have a speaker that's going to be joining us from the organization, from the South African office, talking about Giving Tuesday. What is Giving Tuesday? How it can be a great fundraising and volunteer mobilization model for your charity. And that is next week, Thursday, the 5th of November, same time, same place. Please invite your colleagues. If you're not part of our WhatsApp group, please get hold of Melanie or I, and we will gladly add you. Thank you for joining us. Please stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Don't forget, this has been recorded, and we will put the link on the WhatsApp group by lunchtime today, and you'll be able to go to the YouTube channel and download this great content. So once again, Carolyn, thank you so much. Now over to you for a final goodbye.
Yes, Carolyn, thank you so much. I love the way you make me think differently about things. Thank you, everybody who've stuck it out till the end and visit with us every week. We really appreciate it. Stay well, and we will see you again next Thursday.
Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.